Where does inspiration come from? Where does innovation begin? Where does the future really start? Our story began in a dorm room in 1975 on a strip of paper. And from there, a vision was born. We designed technology to build, technology to grow, technology to learn, explore, and create. And we turned a world of possibility into a world of reality. But no journey is without obstacles, and our challenges only encouraged us to go further. This is a new chapter with new frontiers, new possibilities, new obstacles, and a renewed passion and vision to face them all.
It is our mission to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more.
Let me try that again. I need to start with some predictive analytics. So there was a big Super Bowl this weekend. How many months ago did you know that the Eagles were going to win?
Beginning of the season.
And I'm so glad that you were able to come to celebrate.
It's like, it was an awesome, I thoroughly enjoyed watching it, and congratulations, I would assume. It's great.
We were really glad that you were able to come here on the heels of that, kind of knowing that it would happen. Good time to be in Philly. I guess I want to start at the beginning. You grew up and you wanted to be a professional cricket player. Why?
Somebody said, why not? I must say, when I look back at it, and I did reflect a lot about growing up, what were my ambitions, what was I thinking about? And I have to admit, I had pretty provincial ambition. All I wanted to do was play. I was not good enough to play real professional cricket. I thought I'd play some great cricket for my state growing up in India, and work in a bank and study political science, and that was it. And then somehow, in fact, I think it was a bit of my father pushing me, and it was a bit of me finally awakening to the world outside that led me to explore. But it's fascinating that how we think of that burning ambition early on is what drives you. But I think what I had, though, was some curiosity. And that's what sustained me in the long run, versus any particular idea of what I wanted to do in the very beginning.
That curiosity, though, led you in some maybe unsettling directions. So you took an entrance exam to the IIT.
Which is not that successful, yeah.
And by that you mean you failed it?
Yeah.
And so what did you do? How did you rebound from that and decide, you know what, I'm going to become a computer scientist anyway?
You know, this is my father, who was very, very good academically, and he always used to look at my report cards and be pretty stunned as to how anybody can be this bad. And but the beauty of at least the way he said it was endearing. He never made me feel terrible about it, but he would just sort of say, yeah, that means you must have some other sort of real passions other than trying to score well. It so happened, though, that I think sometime maybe I was in ninth grade, that he had bought me a Sinclair ZX80, which was sort of my first introduction to computers. And that turned me on to a lot of what eventually became a real passion. So I think at that point I said, even though the idea of going to an engineering school was not hard set, but I was to tinker And quite frankly, I wouldn't have done computer science if I had not failed the IIT exam, I think. And it turned out I went and got an engineering degree after all, and then I followed it up with a master's, and then the rest is history.
And you came to the US, to Wisconsin, of all places, for your master's. What motivated that decision?
Yeah, so I had not sort of been to west of Bombay, and so I showed up in Wisconsin. And I must say, I picked up this bad habit of smoking in college, and one winter in Wisconsin, I was out of it because you had to sort of go outside and smoke, and it was not worth it. and so that, to me, it was a decision of where could I go do a course that gave me an opportunity. It was a small school, it was a very small program, great professors, learned a ton, and and that's from there I went to work at Sun, and that was a great break.
And what brought you to Microsoft? Because one of the things that comes through so clearly in your book is you felt like this was a big luck story, like you were in the right place at the right time.
Oh, for sure. In fact, it's so extreme of a luck story. Is I actually was leaving Sun to go to business school, and I was going to go to Chicago, and right during that time is when I got a Microsoft offer, and I said, maybe not, I'll still go to full-time business school. But the guy who was hiring me had convinced me that drop out and join now, because this is where anyway you're going to come later. And so that's what I did.
At that time, you were also planning on at least making some kind of shift to investment banking.
That was my idea, quite frankly. And then it took me a nanosecond to decide that was not my future.
If you had become a banker, where do you think you would be today?
At Microsoft.
But not a CEO. So tell me about early days at Microsoft, because it was a very different company and culture then. What was it like to be there you were there before Windows 95 even came out?
Oh, for sure, yeah. For me, Microsoft today and Microsoft that I joined still, quite honestly, it's a different scale and a different place for sure, and a time and what have you. But I don't sort of fundamentally think of the place differently, because, and if anything, I've tried to go back to the very origin of the company. When you think about us as a company, who are we? We are really maker of platforms and tools. The first product that Bill and Paul created was the basic interpreter for the Altair. And I joined Microsoft at a very exciting time when we were just, for the first time, creating a 32-bit operating system, what became Windows NT. And it was very clear that there is this profound shift to essentially an Intel-based architecture on both, not just the desktop, but even on the server side. And we were able to do a fantastic job of taking that secular shift and democratizing technology so that every small business to a large business could deploy what became the computing power that transformed business. In fact, if you look at productivity stats, the last time technology truly contributed to productivity growth on a broad swath of the economy was the late 90s and early 2000s, thanks to some of the work that happened at Microsoft and elsewhere during that era.
So you actually claim that the company has a soul, which is sort of strange, right? We normally think about maybe people having a soul. You say Microsoft has a soul.
People have a soul.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I've always wondered. But what is the soul of a company?
Adam. Here's my belief. I think companies have a core identity. It's a little bit of that's one of the reasons why I tell even internally the story of our birth a lot. Mm-hmm. It's not that new capability, you build a lot of it. Technology, of course, comes and goes. There's profound shifts in the paradigms. Mm-hmm. But your core identity is something that I believe has to be reinforced and expressed differently with changing technology. But you don't need to pick up a completely different identity. In terms of why does the world need you? Like I always ask myself, what is it that we should do for customers and partners? In fact, what's the sensibility that will be lost if we just disappeared? It's sort of the existential question that is very helpful in picking strategy in my mind, because I don't like doing things out of envy. I like doing things because they are things that we can do and make a unique contribution to. So that's where this notion of invoking the soul comes in, and it's been actually very helpful for us to pick markets we want to participate in and not. And then the markets that you participate in that come naturally to you, you tend to do much better.
So we normally define identity as what's distinctive, central, and enduring about an organization. How did you figure out what that soul was at Microsoft?
You know, in some sense, it goes back to recognizing who are we at our best? What is that innate capability that we have? There is new capability that we will have to build with every changing technology. Or now today you have to build a lot of AI capability. But even what we do with AI is so different than, say, two other companies that may have AI. Because in my case, I'm truly trying to not count, I'm not sort of saying, hey, here's my AI, look how cool I am. It's immaterial to me. It's only relevant, in fact, it's even relevant for our business model, if I can take the AI capability we have and turn it into someone else's AI capability. In other words, either it's a small business or a large business or a public sector organization, if they can take the building blocks we create and turn it into intelligence that's driving them, then we have added value. So that innate approach is what I sort of identify as the identity and the soul. And so going back again to that very origin story, we're a tool maker. We create platforms for others to create. Like I always say this line of, we create technology so that others can create more technology. And that's how I got to it.
So when Steve Ballmer announced that he was stepping down as CEO, your name was not on the list of potential candidates. What got you into consideration? And how did you sort of prove that you were the guy?
Quite frankly, I mean, a lot of people ask me this, hey, do you think that you're going to become CEO? I mean, until Steve Ballmer sort of decided to retire, I was definitely not sitting around in my office saying, hey, when is he going to retire? I had a very important job, and I was pretty thrilled about it. And even quite frankly, it was not even anyone I was asked to raise my hand or anything, and the board did what it should do, which is looked widely inside and outside. And there was this one piece which I even talk a little bit about in the book, which is when I was interviewing for it, the board asked, it's like, do you want to be the CEO? I said, only if you want me to be. And they said, no, but if you want to be a CEO, you should really want to be a CEO. I said, look, that's not me. I remember going in fact, recounting this to Steve, and Steve said, yeah, it's too late to change. Yeah, you are who you are.
I think the contrast is so interesting, right? Because we every year in leadership class here, we show a video of Steve Ballmer doing his monkey dance where, he's kind of on the stage, out of control. And you are not that person. What was it like to fill those shoes, having, I don't want to call you necessarily an introvert, but you're definitely not as extroverted as he is.
I mean, look, I grew up in the company that Paul and Bill founded and Steve and Bill built. And I'm grateful for every opportunity they've given me. And I've learned a ton from both of them. The best advice that Steve gave me was to not try to fill his shoes. I mean, in fact, if anything, he would always push me to say, hey, look, be your own person. And that was clearly what I did, because there's no way, whether it was Bill or Steve, trying to emulate them having gotten onto the job that they held. It would have been just a fool's errand. And so I did the best I could to learn from them, which I did over my 25 years in the company. But at the same time, I've never sort of had that shadow of, well, I now need to do what they would have done. In in some sense, it didn't come to me even. That let me try and second guess myself based on what they may have done.
You also then pretty quickly said, look, we're going to orchestrate a major culture change. I think the first quote I heard from you that went public was, for too long we've been the know-it-all company and we need to become the learn-it-all company. That's not an easy message to deliver. What led you to that?
Yeah. In fact, the way I've thought about this, it's actually one of the things that I probably understand a lot more now 4 years into my job than I even understood it getting into the job. It's a systems problem, right? Which is you have these three things that get into a beautiful lockstep when you're successful. The concept or the idea, the product, whatever you want to call it, that was a hit. The capability you built around it, and the culture that innately gets built. If you think about Microsoft, we had grand success, and not just one, but many. And so if you look at even the distance between Microsoft and the competition in, say, late 90s, early 2000s, there was real daylight. It's not like, say, today, the 5 or the 7 companies, depending on how you count. Any given day, all 7 of us are a cluster of, competition. In that, what happened is, it is natural that the culture, when you're doing so well, especially around the concepts that you invented, you felt like, you knew it all. The inspiration for that cultural change came actually from reading Carol Dweck's work around mindset. And that's where I borrowed this completely from. And I'd read it multiple years before becoming CEO in the context of my kids' education. And she talks about the growth mindset. And I sort of paraphrase that as essentially what you learn in school, I guess. I mean, if you have two students, one of them has more innate capability, the other one has less, but the person who has less is a learn-it-all, will ultimately get better. And that applies to CEOs, that applies to companies. And so I think it has been a helpful cultural metaphor for us to say that you can't act like a know-it-all and you have to be a learn-it-all.
It's also come in handy, for those of us who are parents, right? Because we've all said don't be a know-it-all, but I never had anything to say after that. Now there's an alternative, which is nice. I think the family questions are fascinating. So you're incredibly open and candid in the book about some challenges that you faced in your own family, which I think played a big role in your developing empathy. Can you talk to us about what happened and how it changed you?
Yeah, I mean, in the context that word which I use a lot of empathy, and I think I should first make the case for it. I mean, because most people think empathy is it's sort of a soft skill, may not be as relevant for sort of the hard work of business. But whereas I look at it and say, if you look at what's the source of innovation, the source of innovation is your ability to grasp what are the unmet, unarticulated needs of customers, and where is that going to come from? You can't say, I'm going to just go in, and I believe it comes from empathy. But you can't go into work and switch this on as saying, hey, here's the empathy button, and now I'm going to switch it on, and I'm now going to figure out the unmet, unarticulated needs.
You don't have an app for that?
No, you don't. You don't. I think life teaches you that. That's at least my experience. Who I was at 25 and who I was at 30 was two different things, fundamentally because of the birth of my son. So, my son was born when I was 29, and both my wife and I were only children of our parents, and so the birth of our first child was a much anticipated event on both sides, and we were all excited. And even a few hours before Zane, my son, was born, if somebody had asked me what is going through my head, or what are you worried about, or what are you anticipating, I would have sort of talked about, how is Anu, my wife, going to go back to work, and what's the daycare going to look like. And yet that night everything changed because of complications. He was born with cerebral palsy, and so that episode changed. But for me, it was not like night and day that day, although it happened. I would say for multiple years, I struggled with it. It was mostly, I was reflecting on why did this happen to me? All my plans were thrown out of the window. And whereas I watched my wife, and then as soon as she recovered from a C-section, she was driving Zane up and down Seattle, taking him to every therapy possible, giving him the best shot, chance. And it's only by watching her over multiple years I realized nothing happened to me. Something happened to Zane, and I had to step up and be the parent and the father. And that is, for the first time, it clicked much in a deeper sense, which is, I think, innate in all of us as humans, that seeing life through others' eyes, even for someone as close as your own son. And that's when I realized, wow, this is what it is. You know, and I'm sure that's what reflected is me as a manager, me as a colleague, and because people talk about compartmentalizing your work life from your private life, and the reality is, how does one do it? You are one complete self in both places, and so that's kind of where I think about empathy as something, just listening to what happens to you in life, and then using that power and expressing yourself completely, even at work.
How is Zane doing now, and how has opening up about this story changed your relationships at work?
I mean, I was fairly open, obviously, in a very more private setting. I didn't have the platform that I have now, and but one of the things that I've always been very open about is accessibility as a passion. Zane's experience in particular, because he's locked in even today. So one of the avenues that we've always pursued is what are ways we can help him. In fact, a couple of high school kids locally in Bellevue, did this amazing project with a speech therapist to help him change, because he loves music, and one of the things is he loves to be in control of his own music versus my wife or me being in control of it. And so they figured out a way for him to be able to change music, and I think accessibility is something that we across the company now are very, very focused on, because when we talk about AI, the one thing that I've sort of noticed is that more than anything else, it completely changes the game around accessibility.
So this is kind of an interesting lens to bring into Microsoft, right? Because you're talking about empathy, and this is a company that historically was known for having a reasonable amount of competition, right? Some degree of stacked performance rankings where people are pitted against each other. And I remember a story from the 90s with one of the usability test labs where people came in and the data came back, and the feedback was 6 out of 10 people don't understand the graphical user interface that Windows is bringing, and a software engineer said, well, where do you find 6 morons? And you're shifting that, right? You're trying to get everyone to be more user focused, to bring empathy to the table. How have you gone about doing that?
I mean, the culture change, the first frame beyond saying, okay, let's go from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls, is to also frame it as a continuous process of renewal versus a transformation from one set of attributes to another set of attributes that can be frozen in time. So this learning culture means every day you have to learn some. And there are practical ways to do it. For example, this entire customer obsession. If you want to really get good at meeting unmet, unarticulated needs, that means you've got to be able to listen to what's happening. It could be an engineer looking at log files. It can be a salesperson actually talking. It doesn't matter. Both of them, you're pattern recognizing way beyond what is even in front of you. That's a skill that I think we can learn, and that's a skill, a muscle you can exercise every day. A second thing is take diversity and inclusion. The culture around diversity and inclusion only comes by behaviors every individual exhibits in every meeting, and collectively they add up. Do you go into a meeting where you recognize the differing styles? Do you recognize how do you create that inclusive environment so that people can participate? And so to me, the other one, which is a classic, is no competition respects any of our boundaries of division and organization. And so to be able to really look at those boundaries as not sort of, is static, but more dynamic. These are all things that we get to do on a daily basis. So we've created a bit of a frame around it, but most importantly is to create the frame that culture and continuous renewal is something that we do every day.
I think the leadership that you've displayed during this process is extraordinary. This is now coming up on 4 years, right, since you started?
I just finished it, 4th of February.
Which, congratulations. I mean, I actually met with a group of students that are joining Microsoft earlier today, and they said it is a completely different company from what it was before you arrived. And yeah, I think there will be many case studies written about this one day by some other business school. But I'm curious about the roadmap for culture change. You have over 100,000 people working for you. How did you make this happen, and what are the takeaways for leading and driving a culture change?
I don't know whether I have a roadmap that works universally. I wish I did, but here is at least what I'm trying to do, which is what has bothered me about maybe this is because my father was a Marxist or what have you, but what has bothered me is this contract that people have, especially in a company, in a tech business like ours, where anyone can walk out any day and go to any company of their choice. And this notion that I work at Microsoft is what I wanted to change. It's what I always say. In fact, even at the last town hall, somebody said, hey, how should we think about people who leave Microsoft and why are they leaving Microsoft? I said, look, if working at Microsoft, whether it's our identity, our sense of purpose, our culture does not resonate with you, you should vote with your feet. And in fact, let's reframe it where you don't think of working for Microsoft, but Microsoft works for you. And that is what I believe in. Like, for example, one of the reasons why I believe I stayed for 25 years is take this passion I have around accessibility. Yeah. Microsoft's given me the most amazing platform. I didn't have to wait to become CEO for that, by the way. It gave me the most amazing platform to go have real impact on what sort of spoke to me. And I think that that's the case for the 100,000 people. And it's not going to be even. It's not going to be this beautiful thing every day that's going to be consistent. You have to have some tolerance for imperfection. That is life. But if you have a little bit of tolerance and forbearance, I think you can turn this equation where it's not like you're working, but maybe these are platforms for you to realize your own personal philosophy and passion.
There had to be some moments when you wondered, is this going to work? And I think that probably the most public one was the Grace Hopper conference. Talk to us about what happened there and what impact it had on you.
I mean, what happened there was I made a complete stupid mistake. I mean, it's fascinating. It's such a nonsensical answer to give to a question being asked in a women's conference about for a CEO of a company around what one should do if they feel that they're not comfortable asking for a raise. It was a great learning moment because nobody cared about what my personal experience was. What mattered to everyone in the conference and way beyond was, did I get my responsibility as a CEO was not to say trust in the system, but to shape the system that has a chance of ever being trusted. It was a massive learning experience for me. And we've gone to work on it. We have a real challenge, I think broadly, in our industry for sure, where it's not just about even having parity on pay, but it's about being able to have equal opportunity for equal work. And we're pushing hard. In fact, one of the stats that I look at is on aggregate, for example, is women's representation growing. But the more particular challenge we have is in tech. And that, I think, we are seeing some glimmers of hope, but we have a long way to go.
What are you finding actually makes the difference?
I think it's that inclusive behavior. You have to work at multiple things. For example, we have to sort of do the best work in schools where we make sure that young girls are also attracted to things like computer science. For example, Minecraft in Edu, interestingly enough, is a fascinating tool for that, because the curriculum around Minecraft is more inviting for all genders. So it's one tool, it's not the only tool. We have to make sure that we recruit broadly and make it possible for people to get into Microsoft. And then once they're there, the cohort, the support, the sponsorship, the mentoring that is there a support system that helps them feel included, feel the sense of belonging. But then also mid-career, whether it is parental leave or caregiver leave, which is policies that need to be there that I think are more conducive, because I think unfortunately still the burden of some of the child care or even parental care and others, it falls on women, and so you've got to be able to create systems that allow to support them. But the thing that I've learned is without having inclusion be something that is deeply ingrained in the culture, in every meeting, in every setting, and that I think is what you have to work on.
I think one thing that's really interesting about hearing you talk about that is, I think this is clear in almost everything you say, but there's an unusual level of humility here, especially for a CEO of a massive company. I don't meet that many CEOs who say, I gave a nonsensical answer to a question. Do you have steps that you take, or are there parts of your day that are built in to keep that humility?
The one thing that I've always felt is, from ancient Greece to modern Silicon Valley, the one thing that has brought down empires or companies or people is hubris. So I don't know, it's never been my thing, and at least I've approached it as confidence is super important. I'm pretty confident, but understanding that line between having confidence in your own capability and yet having the humility to learn, I think, quite frankly, I picked it up probably from at least my high school coach in cricket, more than anything else.
I guess we have a lot of coaches to thank then, if that's the impact of cricket. I want to talk about technology. About almost 2 years ago now, I saw you give a speech at a Microsoft event where you laid out the future of Cortana and the way that my day was going to be scheduled, where my bot would talk to your bot, and then it would call up the history of all the people I'd met with in the city that I'm going to and prompt me for how to meet with those people. And I was really excited and a little freaked out. And I'm wondering if you can paint a picture for where you see this going in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, see, the ultimate interface has to be natural language. Because if you think about it, up to now we've all adapted to how the human interacted with the computer based on the metaphors that the computer has built into it, whether it's the graphical interface or touch, or even the speech interface today. It's just not a real dialogue. It's sort of still you're syntactically learning how to talk to a machine based on its understanding, not it's your understanding. And so I think where we have to get to is a complete multi-turn dialogue with computers, which is completely natural. That's the ultimate quest. And that's only going to happen if you really have true intelligence. That means the ability to reason about the world, your work, your life, and to be able to have that contextual understanding. So that's our pursuit. When we think about we're in the very, very early innings, or whether it's Cortana or Siri or Alexa or Google Assistant or what have you, they're all getting smarter. But I think, and they're getting, we're trying, like for example, the way I think about the future of the interface is, it's not going to be device bound at all. It's going to be multi-sense and multi-device. But just changing that interface is not good enough. That's what's got to be backed up. But there's some, like for me, some of the delightful things Cortana does for me today is I make a commitment. I say to you, Adam, I'll call you back on Friday. And guess what? Cortana wakes up on Friday and says, hey, did you do this? I didn't have to go enter it into my to-do app or what have you. That ability to keep track of commitments, that's what a smart assistant should do. And so to me, that's the first level of intelligence, and there's much more coming. And that's kind of the capabilities we're building in.
It seems like the difference between Cortana and a manager is I can say to Cortana, no, I didn't do it and I don't want to. Whereas a person might hold me accountable. What's the role for humans as our assistants get smarter and smarter?
First of all, this is a fascinating discussion because most people sort of say it's the AI versus the human. I think we have to sort of first grab hold of all the opportunities AI creates to empower humans. Going back to sort of accessibility, one of the things that has been fascinating to watch is, for example, we launched in Windows 10 some new capability around eye gaze. Basically the gaze of your eye as an input mechanism, which is tremendous for someone who has ALS because they can now type with just their eyes. Or one of the apps we launched is called Seeing AI, that gives anybody with visual impairment the ability to interpret the world because of the ability for the camera to be able to recognize objects. Or learning tools inside a Word or OneNote can give a dyslexic kid the ability to comprehend and read. These are all things that came out of AI. In fact, one of the things at Cambridge, England, we worked on, along with the University of Washington, was a project called Inner Eye. So this is for radiotherapy. I had not realized it, but the doctors spend enormous amount of time trying to actually manually, go over the tumor and demarcate it, whereas AI can do a much better job with more precision. But the doctor then spends more time with the patient. So I fundamentally believe that AI absolutely can be designed to help humans, empower humans to do more and achieve more. Now, that said, we should be clear-eyed about displacement. So I'm not at all saying that there is not going to be displacement. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't want to fall for this fallacy of a lump of labor and say, okay, what are all the new jobs that get created that we will need new skills for? And in fact, my passion for LinkedIn comes from there, which is if we can now use LinkedIn as that digital feedback loop on a continuous basis for what are the jobs of the future, what's the skills required, how do we deliver that training, then I think we can, as a society, do a better job of dealing with what is inevitably going to be pretty hard displacement.
I have to ask, there is a rather famous Wharton alum, no, not that one, Elon Musk, who's obviously scared a lot of people around what if AI lacks human ethics, and what if this all goes off the rails. You're a technology optimist. What do you say to those concerns?
I mean, that's why I said, there is no question if the debate on when is AGI or this artificial general intelligence going to happen, Elon, I think, is much more of the camp that it's going to happen imminently, and and there's a lot of arguments. You ask 10 people, they'll come up with 10 different answers. So leaving that speculation aside, I would say the following. Let's not abdicate our control of how things get shaped. To me, it's a design choice. Before even we talk about anything the government or regulators and policies should do, let's start with people building AI. explainability of AI is one of the fundamental challenges that we have to deal with, right? How did this decision get made? Oh yeah, it's some eigenvector somewhere deep down. No. You got to go in and sort of really have the ability to, in fact, reason about the decision itself. So I think some of the best research should be done around explainability. We should, in fact, have design, just like for good UI, we had all sorts of guidelines for good user interface. We should have guidelines for good AI. How do you make sure that you actually have a testing regime so that bias inadvertently doesn't get introduced or advertently gets introduced? So you have to have some set of processes by which you can ensure that you don't have unintended consequences of AI. So I'm more in the camp of first design for empowering humans. Life's path dependent. The way we may get to AGI will go through routes that we have created. But if we abdicate too soon, then our worst fears can absolutely come true, but we won't.
So you mentioned explainability. You've been writing and talking a lot about quantum computing. Does that mean, I'm wondering if you can explain that to us, right? I think of quantum entanglement. Does that mean the computer's in two places at once? The cloud is now part of multiple clouds? What's going on there?
Here's, I wish I understood. We have this amazing Fields Medal winner who is part of our quantum program, and he says, hey, do you understand square roots? I said, yeah, maybe. And he says, that's all you need to know. But one of the fundamental, let me make the case for quantum. For all of the progress that we have made with, let's say, cloud computing. It's amazing to see the amount of compute capability or capacity that's just right there. The number of cores you can spin up to run computational jobs is immense. But that said, we still cannot model the enzyme that's part of food production. We can model that catalyst that can absorb carbon. Right, so in other words, these are computational problems that are not solvable, at least in polynomial time today, using the von Neumann machine and the architecture. So we are running out of steam. It's sort of an extreme statement to make, but we are running out of steam of the current set of computational architecture. So that's why quantum and quantum research and quantum commercialization is inevitable, in my opinion. We at Microsoft took an approach that one of the things there is you can sort of build, because one of the biggest problems of quantum computers is how do you stabilize enough qubits. And
it's exactly what I was thinking was the problem. So glad to have that confirmed.
The challenge there, I mean, you can go at it, and there are multiple approaches. There are many researchers at work, and there might even be a milestone or two that is near term, which is quantum supremacy for some finite algorithm, for some defined set of algorithms, especially cryptographic things that you could sort of say, hey, this thing does better than any classical computer. Right. But I want us to pursue a general purpose quantum computer that is capable of solving some of these hard challenges. In order to do that, at least in our case, we have taken an approach where there is a fundamental math theory called topological matter, which is the way to stabilize these qubits. You then have to literally find the physical particles. There's these particles called Majorana particles that our physicists have found in lab conditions which exhibit this topological matter. And then, of course, the real challenge starts, which is how do you assemble a quantum computer with that matter? And then, of course, a complete new computer science stack, right? It's not a one-dimensional machine. That means we, in fact, on Azure today, we have a simulator. In fact, like I look at it and say, wow, all the algorithms I learned in school are, kind of not relevant anymore. I got to go back and relearn a complete new computer science stack.
Or you could just go and be CEO. Either way.
That's right. You can hire a couple of Fields Medal winners, yeah.
Excellent. So let's take the audience round. We have a lot of audience questions submitted. We've covered some of this ground already, but I think there's some interesting questions here. So the first thing that I want to get your take on is what was the class that influenced you most in college?
What is a class? I don't know whether it is in college, but you know what influenced me the most was my middle school or high school poetry. That's, and I can relate, in fact, my love for computer science to poetry, although the first time I took it, I was not really into English or poetry, but I must say I learned everything about compression, expression, the compactness of the abstractions in poetry are just beautiful.
Next question, why do you wake up so early? And how early do you wake up?
5:30. And why? I mean, I got to get my run in, and that's the only way to get my run in before I get to work.
It's fair. You mentioned the LinkedIn acquisition. What was the strategy and the logic behind that?
You know, we have the world's largest professional cloud when you look at what Microsoft and Office 365 in particular represents. And LinkedIn was the world's largest professional network. And I felt these two things being brought together to serve the professionals of the world, realize their economic opportunity, and empower them is something that I've always deeply thought about. And I've talked to Jeff and Reed for years. And finally it came about.
HoloLens, you've bet big on virtual reality. Is that going to make its way into the workplace at any point? And if so, how?
In fact, in workplaces where it's making its way in a big way, for especially training, it turns out, is the killer app. If I look at sort of how the airlines and the Boeing and others are using it, it's instead of having your entire aircraft go offline or even go to a simulator, you can bring whatever part right where you are. Cleveland Clinic is teaching an anatomy class using HoloLens. And so the first set of applications are many industrial applications, whether it's surgery, whether it's education, whether it's repair or training.
All right, I need to preface this one with a disclaimer, which is you write in the book at length about how you've actually embraced some of your competitors as partners, Apple and others. But there's at least one student in the audience who wants to know, as a new grad, why should I choose Microsoft over other large tech companies?
I mean, quite frankly, this is a question I answer a lot, especially to college grads. I think the only reason why you want to join Microsoft is for the following reason. If you just want to join a cool company, don't bother. If you want to be joining a company that's going to make others cool, join Microsoft. That's, I think, what we are all about. We're not trying to be the cool kid or the cool company. Our sole purpose is to build technology so that others can create technology. And I'll let you choose, in 2017, what's a more virtuous mission?
Related to that, is there a role for non-tech people in the future?
2018, sorry.
Yeah. How do people think about, as the skills that you're going to depend on, the kinds of people you're going to hire are going to change, what kinds of topics should we be studying now, and how should we prepare for an AI-enabled future?
It's a great question. I think the core analytical skills are always going to be the critical reasoning, critical thinking skills are the most relevant as opposed to any subject matter depth you may have in any field, because that you'll have to relearn. I remember, for example, I learned so much about auction theory much later on when I was running some of our search auction businesses as opposed to in business school. So I think you will always learn a ton as you go along. But the one thing that for sure in a school like Wharton that you will pick up is an amazing ability to tame complexity because of the analytical skills you develop. And that's going to be universally relevant.
Mm-hmm. Related to that, if someone in the audience wants to be a CEO one day, what advice would you give them at this moment?
Here's what I would say. If you are waiting to do your best work after you become CEO, stop. Do your best work now, and you will be a CEO one day.
Building on that, another question that multiple people have asked is if you're starting out a career and there are people who don't see your potential, how do you get them to recognize it?
I think this is where I would say have confidence, because it may not work as efficiently. It's not an efficient market. That's what I would say, because in some sense there is your best work may not immediately get rewarded, but it's inevitably going to catch up. So have some patience, but more importantly, have confidence. And I think that's doing it where you are confident about your work, you are evangelizing it, speak up for it, and even if it is not, go back at it, have persistence and confidence. Those would be the two words I would use.
So one of the things you did when you came in as CEO is you invited Bill Gates back in sort of a more product-oriented, sort of tech-oriented advisory capacity. I think a lot of people would have been terrified of this because Bill seems to know more about everything than even the world's experts know on it. So what's it like to work with him?
Terrified, no. For me it was super important because one thing you got to remember, a founder has a status in a company, and especially someone iconic like Bill, that just cannot be replicated. And no one goes to Bill and says, let me sort of have an average day with him. No, you prepare. And he draws the best from folks. And so to me, that's invaluable, even for me. I mean, the one thing that Bill is he's the most intellectually honest person. And he'll call it as it is. And that intellectual honesty is a rare commodity. And so therefore, I think he sets high standards and pushes me and the rest of the company.
His collaborators often talk about how that intellectual honesty rubs off on them and they find themselves asking Bill questions. Is there something that he's imprinted on you? So is there a Bill Gates question that you found you've sort of internalized as one of your own?
I would say one of my more intimidating moments with Bill was, I think I was it was 1996, maybe 1995. I was presenting to him, and one of my bosses at that time, who later on became CEO of VMware, called Paul Moritz, was sitting next to me, and I distinctly remember Bill looking at him and saying, "It's time for fresh and new IQ." And I didn't know what the heck just happened. Did I just get fired? Should I stop? Should I walk out? And that was a moment of confidence where I just moved to the next slide and things worked out. So if there is anything that has been imprinted is, be confident.
When you think about sort of your life, people always ask female leaders, how do you deal with work-life balance? There's a question for you about work-life balance, and I think your story is particularly interesting because in addition to the challenges you faced with your children, you also did a commute back and forth between Seattle and Vancouver with your wife for years. How did you manage that, and what advice do you have for how we can all keep it together?
I wish I had some formula for it. The one thing that at least I'm trying to practice is not to view it as a balance in some sense as that needs to be accounted for, but it's some kind of a harmony that you find. Maybe it's a better frame because then you don't get into this anxiety of measuring it in quantitative terms like time, but by quality. And so, for example, how much time do you spend with your kids where you're not trying to reach for your phone or you're not thinking about the email that you didn't send or are about to send? That presence is going to probably be everything. I mean, I think, we all say this, but it's hard, which is attention is your scarcest commodity. How you apportion it, how you're not distracted into doing things that are not giving you everything out of every moment of your life is probably the most important thing. Quite frankly, even the tools we want to build and the technology we want to build, we want to be able to give you back that empowerment. But for me, that's been core to how I achieve some harmony between work and life.
The natural follow-up on that is also in here, which is, do you have rules for unplugging from tech or practices that you follow to make sure that it doesn't sort of command all your attention?
You know, for me, the thing that I do pretty religiously is I read before going to bed analog, and that helps. No screens before going to bed, and that's for whatever reason it makes a real difference.
Mm-hmm. All right, in closing, a question we like to ask everyone who comes through here: what's the worst career advice you've ever gotten?
The worst?
Worst.
The worst career advice. I think any advice that I've gotten through the years, which was all about short-term maxima or local maxima, has just been terrible. Because life is not that. Life's about figuring it out at the end of it, some global maxima that you uniquely can achieve. And by just trying to go being a short-termer just doesn't work. So anytime I've been pushed to say, hey, do this because this is going to be short-term advantages, has been the worst advice.
And is there something you learned in business school that you now believe is wrong?
Something, markets are efficient.
Take that, Chicago. Finally, you take questions from your interns every year. I understand you get some oddball questions. Is there a favorite or most unusual that stands out in your mind?
Oh man, that's my most intimidating thing. Going to the intern Q&A is a nightmare. I guess the last question was last year. Somebody asked, is it GIF or GIF?
And?
I leave it to you.
Satya, it's been such a privilege to have you here and to watch your leadership from a little bit afar and up close, and we can't wait to see where it goes next. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.